My name is Lauren, and I'm 32. I'm standing in a barn, draped with fairy lights, watching my brother Caleb twirl his new bride Samantha across the dance floor. My son Ethan, just 9, sits beside me scribbling in his little notebook. I'm proud, but there's a knot in my stomach. Samantha's cold glance my way feels like a warning. Something's off, and I can't shake it. What happened next changed everything. Where are you watching from? Hit like, subscribe, and let's dive into this moment together. The barn smelled of cedar and wine, and the band's upbeat strumming filled the air as I sat at a round table covered with a cream tablecloth. Ethan was next to me, his small fingers flipping through his notebook, his brow furrowed like he was solving a puzzle. Across from us, my cousin Rachel sipped her drink, her eyes scanning the room. I adjusted my navy dress, still self-conscious about the way it hugged my hips. I wanted to feel like I belonged here at Caleb's wedding, but the chatter around me felt like a wall I couldn't climb. I leaned toward Rachel, hoping to ground myself. "How's the city treating you?" I asked, forcing a smile. She was a paralegal in Albany, always dressed sharp, her auburn hair pulled into a sleek bun. "It's a grind, but I'm good," she said, her voice warm but distracted. "You okay? You seem tense." I shrugged, glancing at Ethan, who was now sketching a tree in his notebook. "Just feeling out of place. These people are all so polished." Rachel's eyes softened. "You're fine, Lauren. You're real. That's more than most of them can say." Her words helped, but only for a moment. I looked over at the dance floor where Caleb was laughing with Samantha's friends, a group of women in shimmering dresses who seemed to glide rather than walk. I stood smoothing my dress and decided to try joining them. Maybe I could bridge the gap, show Caleb I was here for him. "Be right back," I told Rachel, giving Ethan's shoulder a squeeze. He barely looked up, lost in his drawing. I approached the group, my heart thudding. "Hey, mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice brighter than I felt. The women turned their smiles thin. One of them, a blonde with perfect curls, tilted her head. "Oh, you're Caleb's sister, right?" she said. Her tone clipped. "I'm Chloe, Samantha's best friend." "Yeah, I'm Lauren," I said, trying to keep my smile steady. "It's a beautiful wedding, isn't it?" Chloe nodded, but her eyes flicked to the others like I was an interruption. "Sure is. Samantha planned every detail. She's got a knack for perfection." The others murmured agreement, and I scrambled for something to say. "I teach kids art at the community center," I offered. "Helped Ethan make some decorations for Caleb's place last week." "That's cute," Chloe said, her lips curling slightly. "Must be nice to have so much free time." The words landed like a pinch. I opened my mouth to respond, but another woman jumped in, talking about her interior design business in Manhattan. The conversation flowed around me, and I stood there invisible, my hands clasped too tightly in front of me. Finally, I mumbled an excuse and slipped back to my table, my cheeks warm. Rachel raised an eyebrow as I sat down. "What happened?" "They're not exactly welcoming," I muttered, picking up my water glass. Ethan looked up, his brown eyes sharp. "Who's not nice, Mom?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Nobody, buddy," I said, quickly ruffling his hair. "Just grown-up stuff." He frowned, but went back to his notebook. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the clink of glasses and the laughter around us. Then I saw Samantha weaving through the tables, her white dress glowing under the string lights. She stopped at ours, her smile wide, but her eyes cool. "Ethan, you look so handsome," she said, bending slightly to meet his gaze. "Bet you're having fun, huh?" Ethan nodded, but his shoulders stiffened. "It's okay," he said, barely looking at her. Samantha straightened her gaze, sliding past me like I wasn't there. "Well, enjoy," she said, turning to leave. As she did, her elbow brushed my wine glass, sending it tipping. Red wine splashed across my dress, a cold shock against my skin. I gasped, grabbing a napkin. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry," Samantha said, her hand flying to her mouth. But her laugh was sharp, almost gleeful. "Clumsy me. You okay?" I dabbed at the stain, my throat tight. "It's fine. I managed, though." My voice shook. Guests at nearby tables glanced over, and I felt their eyes like spotlights. Samantha lingered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You should get that cleaned up," she said, then glided away, her dress trailing behind her like a queen's train. Rachel leaned in, her voice low. "That was no accident, Lauren." I shook my head, not wanting to believe it. "She's just stressed. It's her big day." But Ethan's voice cut through, quiet but clear. "She's not nice, Mom. Her smile's fake." I looked at him, startled. His pencil was still, his eyes fixed on Samantha across the room. Before I could respond, Caleb appeared, his tie slightly loosened, his face flushed from dancing. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, glancing at my stained dress. I forced a nod. "Just a little spill." He frowned, then chuckled. "Samantha's running on nerves. Don't take it personally, Lauren." His words felt like a brush off, and something in my chest tightened. "Sure," I said, but my voice was flat. Caleb clapped Ethan on the shoulder and headed back to the dance floor, leaving me staring at the red blotch on my dress. Rachel reached for my hand, but I pulled away, my mind racing. Was I overreacting, or was something deeper going on? The band played on, but the music felt distant, drowned out by the unease settling in my bones. I stared at the wine stain on my dress, the fabric clinging damply to my thigh. The barn's warm glow felt mocking now, like it was highlighting my every flaw. Rachel's hand hovered near mine, but I couldn't meet her eyes. Ethan's words about Samantha's fake smile echoed in my head, and I wondered if he saw something I was too afraid to admit. The band switched to a slower song, and couples swayed on the dance floor, their ease a stark contrast to the knot in my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need some air," I told Rachel, standing abruptly. Ethan looked up, his pencil pausing mid-sketch. "Want me to come, Mom?" he asked, his voice small but steady. I managed a smile. "Stay here with Rachel. Okay, I'll be quick." He nodded, but his eyes followed me as I wove through the tables, dodging guests with their clinking glasses and carefree laughter. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, the gravel crunching under my heels. I leaned against the barn's wooden wall, the faint hum of crickets mixing with the muffled music inside. My hands shook as I pressed them to my face, willing the sting in my eyes to fade. Why did this hurt so much? It wasn't just the wine or Samantha's laugh. It was the way Caleb dismissed it, like my feelings were an inconvenience. Growing up, he'd always been my protector, the one who'd sneak me extra cookies when Mom was mad or stand up to bullies at school. But now, with Samantha by his side, he felt like a stranger. Footsteps crunched behind me, and I turned to see Rachel, her shawl draped over her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, like she wasn't letting me dodge the question. I shrugged, staring at the ground. "I don't know. I feel like I'm crashing their perfect party." Rachel stepped closer, her expression hardening. "This isn't about you crashing anything. Samantha's been talking about you, Lauren, not just tonight. I heard her last week at the rehearsal dinner telling Chloe you're a leech who's always leaning on Caleb." My stomach dropped. What I whispered, my voice barely audible. Rachel hesitated, then pressed on. "She said you're a burden, that Caleb's always bailing you out." Chloe laughed, said you're stuck in a dead-end job dragging Ethan down with you. "I didn't want to tell you, but after that wine stunt, you deserve to know." The words hit like a slap. A burden I'd worked 2 jobs after Brian left, scraping by to keep Ethan fed and happy. Caleb had helped sometimes, sure, but I'd never asked for handouts. I thought of the late nights grading art projects, the way Ethan's face lit up when I brought home his favorite pizza. Was that what Samantha saw? A failure. I need to talk to Caleb, I said, my voice tight. I turned back toward the barn, but Rachel grabbed my arm. Wait, he's caught up in the party, and honestly, I don't think he'll listen right now. He's all wrapped up in Samantha. I pulled away, my jaw clenching. He's my brother. He'll hear me out. Inside, the reception was in full swing, the air thick with the scent of roasted chicken and perfume. I scanned the room for Caleb, my heart pounding. Ethan was still at the table now, showing Rachel's husband Mark something in his notebook. I caught sight of Caleb near the bar, laughing with a group of guys in suits. I started toward him, but before I could reach him, I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. It was Diane, Samantha's mother, standing with a cluster of older women near the dessert table. Her voice carried sharp and deliberate. "It's such a shame about Caleb's sister," she said, her glass of champagne tilted in her hand. "Single moms like her, they just weigh everyone down. No wonder she's here alone." One of the women chuckled, and another nodded, murmuring something I couldn't hear. My feet froze, rooted to the floor. The room seemed to tilt, the laughter and music blurring into a dull roar. I wanted to scream to tell Diane she didn't know me, but my throat felt sealed shut. Ethan's head snapped up from the table, his eyes locking onto mine. He'd heard it too. His small face tightened, and he clutched his notebook like it was a shield. I forced myself to move to walk toward him, but every step felt like wading through mud. "Mom," he said, as I reached the table, his voice trembling. "Why do they say that about you?" I knelt beside him, my hand on his cheek. "They're wrong, buddy," I said, but my voice cracked. "They don't know us." Rachel was back now, her face pale. "Lauren, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is getting out of hand." I stood, my hands balling into fists. Diane's words, Samantha's rumors, Caleb's dismissal, they were piling up, each one heavier than the last. I looked at Ethan, his eyes wide with worry, and felt a surge of anger. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I had to show him we weren't what they said. But as I glanced at Caleb still laughing across the room, I felt a crack in my resolve. What if he didn't care? What if I was alone in this? The thought clawed at me, and I knew this was only the beginning of the hurt. The barn's lights seemed harsher now, casting long shadows across the tables as the band played a soft melody. I stood by Ethan, my hand still on his cheek, trying to shield him from the sting of Diane's words. His small frame was tense, his notebook clutched tightly against his chest. Rachel's face was a mix of anger and pity, and I hated that look. I wasn't some fragile thing to be pitied, but the weight of Diane's comment, layered on top of Samantha's rumors and Caleb's indifference, was crushing me. I straightened, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Let's get some dessert, buddy," I said to Ethan, guiding him toward the table where cupcakes and pastries were stacked in neat rows. I needed to move to do something normal to keep him from seeing how much this hurt. But as we approached, I caught Chloe's voice from the center of the room, sharp and carrying over the music. She was standing with a microphone, her sequined dress catching the light as she gave a toast. "To Samantha and Caleb," she said, her smile wide. "A couple who knows how to rise above. Not everyone can keep up with their kind of life, but they make it look effortless." Her eyes flicked toward me just for a second, and a few guests followed her gaze. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd light, but pointed. My stomach twisted. Was I imagining it, or was she aiming that at me? Ethan's hand tightened in mine, and I realized he'd noticed too. "Mom, she's talking about you," he whispered, his voice low but fierce. I squeezed his hand, my heart racing. "It's okay," I lied, but my throat was tight. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence that I was reading too much into it. But Chloe's smirk, as she handed the mic to the next speaker, told me otherwise. I guided Ethan back to our table, my legs shaky, and sat down heavily. Rachel leaned in, her voice urgent. "Lauren, that was deliberate," she said. "Chloe's been egging Samantha on all night. They're trying to make you feel small." I shook my head, not wanting to believe it. "Why? What did I ever do to them?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "It's not about you. It's about Samantha needing to be the center of everything. You're Caleb's family, and she can't stand sharing him." Her words made sense, but they didn't dull the ache. I looked across the room, searching for Caleb. He was at the bar again, his back to me, laughing with a guy I didn't recognize. I stood, my hands clenching. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Rachel grabbed my wrist. "Lauren, wait. He's in his own world right now. You'll just get hurt." But I pulled away, my anger pushing me forward. I wove through the crowd, the chatter and clinking glasses fading into a dull hum. When I reached Caleb, I touched his arm, and he turned, his smile fading when he saw my face. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping away from his friend. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice low. "Caleb, did you hear what Chloe just said? And Diane earlier? They're humiliating me in front of everyone." He frowned, glancing around like he was checking if anyone was listening. "Lauren, come on. It's a wedding. People are just joking around. You're taking it too personally." His words hit like a punch. "Personally?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "Samantha spilled wine on me. Her mom called me a burden. And now Chloe's making digs during a toast. How is that not personal?" Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Samantha's under a lot of pressure. And Chloe's just being Chloe. You know how she is. Why can't you let it go?" I stared at him, my chest tightening. This wasn't the brother who'd driven me to the hospital when Ethan was born, who'd stayed up all night helping me pack when Brian left. This was someone else, someone who'd chosen Samantha's side without even asking me how I felt. "Caleb, I'm your sister," I said, my voice trembling. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "Of course it does," he said, but his tone was impatient. "But this is my day, Lauren. Can't you just deal with it?" I stepped back, my eyes burning. He turned back to his friend, dismissing me without another word. I stood there, the room spinning, as the band struck up a new song. I wanted to scream, to grab the mic, and tell everyone what was happening, but I couldn't. Not with Ethan watching. Not with all these strangers judging me. As I turned to head back to the table, I caught sight of Ethan standing near the dessert table, his notebook open in his hands. He was talking to the DJ, a young guy with a shaved head, and slipping him a small piece of paper. Ethan's face was serious, determined, and for a moment, I forgot my own pain. What was he doing? I started toward him, but before I could reach him, Diane's voice cut through the air again, this time from a nearby table. "Honestly, it's no surprise she's struggling," she said to a woman in a green dress. "Women like her, they make bad choices and expect everyone else to clean up the mess." The words sliced through me, and I froze, my breath catching. Ethan turned, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw something new in them. Not just hurt, but anger. He stuffed his notebook into his pocket and started walking toward the stage, his small shoulders squared. My heart pounded. Whatever he was planning, I wasn't sure I could stop it. I watched Ethan move toward the stage, his small frame cutting through the crowd with a purpose that made my heart lurch. My instinct was to stop him, to pull him back to the safety of our table, but my feet wouldn't move. Diane's latest jab echoed in my head, her voice dripping with disdain, and the room felt like it was closing in. The barn's wooden beams, once charming, now loomed like the walls of a cage. I forced myself to follow Ethan, weaving past guests who were oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. As I neared the stage, I saw Ethan pause, his hand brushing the edge of the platform where the DJ was setting up for the next toast. He looked back at me, his brown eyes fierce but uncertain, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind. But then he turned away, his jaw set, and I knew he was determined to do something. My stomach churned. What had he written on that paper? What was he about to say? Before I could reach him, a hand grabbed my arm. It was Rachel, her face tight with worry. "Lauren, don't let him get up there," she whispered. "Whatever he's planning, it's not going to end well." I shook her off, my voice sharp. "He's my son. I'll handle it." But the truth was, I didn't know how. Ethan was already climbing the steps to the stage, his sneakers scuffing against the wood. The DJ Marcus gave him a curious look but didn't stop him. I pushed forward, my heart hammering, but the crowd was thick, and I was caught behind a group of women in glittering dresses, their laughter grating against my nerves. Then I heard a new voice, one that stopped me cold. It was my ex-husband Brian, standing near the bar with a glass of whiskey in his hand. I hadn't seen him earlier, hadn't even known he was invited. His presence hit me like a slap, dragging up memories of late-night fights and empty promises. He was talking to an older man, his voice loud enough to carry. "Lauren's always been a mess," he said, his tone casual, like he was discussing the weather. "Couldn't keep it together after we split. No surprise she's floundering now." The man nodded, chuckling, and I felt my face burn. Brian's words weren't just a betrayal. They were a confirmation of everything Samantha and Diane had been saying. I wanted to march over to tell him he had no right to talk about me, but my legs felt like lead. Ethan was on the stage now, whispering something to Marcus, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. I finally broke through the crowd, reaching the edge of the stage just as the music faded. The room's chatter quieted, and all eyes turned to Ethan. My breath caught. He was so small up there, his hands trembling as he held his notebook. Marcus handed him the microphone, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in Ethan's eyes. But then he straightened, his voice clear and steady. "I just want to say something," he began, and the room went still. I could feel Samantha's gaze from across the barn, her smile frozen. Caleb was nearby. His brow furrowed, but he didn't move. I wanted to run up there to scoop Ethan into my arms and carry him out of this place. But before I could, another voice cut through the silence. It was Diane again, standing near the front, her champagne glass raised like a weapon. "Oh, isn't this sweet?" she said, her voice loud and mocking. "The little boy wants to play hero for his mommy. Too bad she's not worth the effort." A few guests laughed, their voices sharp and cruel, and my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. Ethan's face fell, his confidence wavering, and I saw his hands shake as he gripped the microphone. I started toward the stage, my vision blurring with tears, but Rachel grabbed me again, her voice urgent. "Lauren, don't," she said. "You'll make it worse." I yanked my arm free, my voice a hiss. Worse? How could this get any worse? But as I looked at Ethan, I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of Diane's words. The crowd was watching, some with pity, others with amusement, and I felt like I was drowning. Caleb still hadn't moved, his face a mask of discomfort, and Brian's laughter from the bar echoed in my ears. I was losing control, losing Ethan to this moment, and I didn't know how to stop it. Diane's smirk. Samantha's silence, Caleb's inaction. They were all closing in, and I was trapped, my heart breaking with every second that passed. The air in the barn felt thick, like I was breathing through a straw. Ethan stood on the stage, his small hands gripping the microphone, his face pale under the spotlight. Diane's cruel words hung in the room, her laugh still echoing in my ears, and the scattered chuckles from the crowd made my skin crawl. I was at the edge of the stage, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Rachel's hand was on my arm, but I barely felt it. All I could see was Ethan, my brave boy, looking so small, yet so determined. He cleared his throat, the sound crackling through the speakers, and the room grew quieter. I could see Samantha across the barn, her perfect smile frozen, her eyes narrowed. Caleb was beside her, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. I wanted to scream at him to do something to stop this, but I couldn't move. Ethan's voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. I heard something he said, his words deliberate, something the bride said about my mom. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and my stomach dropped. What was he doing? I took a step forward, my heels clicking on the floor, but Marcus, the DJ, raised a hand, motioning for me to wait. Ethan's eyes found mine, and for a split second, I saw fear in them. But then he looked back at the crowd, his chin lifting. I was outside the bridal suite earlier. He continued, his voice growing stronger. The bride was talking to her friend. She said my mom's a pathetic single mom who's only here because Uncle Caleb feels sorry for her. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that made my head spin. My face burned, and I felt every pair of eyes turn to me. Samantha's smile vanished, her hands clenching at her sides. Diane, standing near the front, let out a sharp scoff, but it was drowned out by the growing whispers. I wanted to run to Ethan to pull him off the stage, but my legs were frozen. He wasn't done. She said mom's like a discount model with a scratched label, Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. And that she's dragging our family down. The words hit me like a tidal wave, each one sharper than the last. I'd known Samantha didn't like me, but hearing it laid bare in front of everyone was like having my skin peeled back. The barn spun, the fairy lights blurring into streaks of gold. Guests were whispering, some shaking their heads, others staring at Samantha with wide eyes. Diane's face was red, her mouth open like she was about to speak, but no words came out. I looked at Caleb, desperate for him to step in to defend me, to be my brother again. But he just stood there, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Ethan and Samantha. Why wasn't he moving? Why wasn't he saying anything? The silence from him hurt more than Diane's laughter, more than Samantha's words. It was like he'd chosen her over me, over us, right there in front of everyone. Ethan lowered the microphone, his shoulders trembling, and I saw his notebook slip from his hand, falling open on the stage. Pages fluttered, revealing colorful drawings and scribbled words. I caught a glimpse of one page labeled Mom's Superpowers, with a sketch of me holding a paintbrush. My throat tightened, tears spilling over before I could stop them. He'd been carrying that with him, his quiet way of fighting for me, and now he was exposing himself to this cruel room. Samantha took a step forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's enough," she said, her tone icy but shaky. "This is a wedding, not a soap opera. Someone get that kid off the stage." A few guests murmured agreement, but others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Marcus hesitated, glancing at me, and I shook my head silently, begging him to let Ethan stay. My boy wasn't done, and neither was I. But the weight of Samantha's words, the crowd's judgment, and Caleb's silence were suffocating me. I felt like I was breaking apart piece by piece, and the worst was yet to come. Samantha's voice sliced through the barn, sharp and commanding, but it couldn't drown out the buzzing in my ears. Ethan stood frozen on the stage, his notebook splayed open at his feet, its pages a silent testament to his love for me. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a mix of shock and curiosity, and I felt their stares like needles on my skin. My tears were hot, unstoppable, but I couldn't look away from my son, so small, yet so exposed. I wanted to shield him, to erase this moment, but I was trapped in the spotlight of their judgment. Diane pushed forward, her heels clicking as she approached the stage. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice booming without a microphone. A child making a scene. Clearly he's learned this behavior from his mother. Her eyes locked onto me, her lips curling into a sneer. "No wonder she's such a failure. Look at the example she's setting." The room erupted in gasps, and a few guests laughed, their voices like shards of glass. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of a table to stay upright. Failure. The word clawed at me, ripping open old wounds from nights spent crying after Brian left, from the days I'd skipped meals to pay for Ethan's school supplies. I wasn't a failure. I couldn't be. But Diane's words, amplified by the crowd's reaction, made me question everything. Ethan's eyes widened, his face crumpling as he looked at me. "Mom!" he said into the microphone, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." The sound of his pain was worse than anything Diane could say. He dropped the mic, the thud echoing through the speakers, and started to step back, his sneakers scuffing the stage. I moved toward him, my vision blurred, but Samantha was faster. She climbed the steps, her white dress swishing, and grabbed the microphone. "Let's move on," she said, her voice tight but polished, like she was hosting a gala. "This is a celebration, not a place for petty grudges. Lauren, maybe you should take your son and sit down." Her words were a command, not a suggestion, and the crowd's murmurs grew approving. I felt the room tilt, the fairy lights spinning above me. Sit down. Like I was a child being scolded. Like I didn't belong in my own brother's life. I looked at Caleb, pleading with my eyes for him to step up to be the brother I needed. But he just shifted his weight, his hands still in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. His silence was a betrayal, deeper than any insult, a knife twisting in my chest. Aunt Margaret, seated near the front, stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "This is shameful," she said, her voice trembling but loud. "Lauren's family. How dare you treat her like this?" Her words were a flicker of hope, but they were drowned out by Diane's sharp retort. "Family," Diane said, turning to face Margaret. "She's a leech who's been riding Caleb's coattails for years. Everyone here knows it." More laughter, louder this time, and I felt my heart shatter. I looked at Ethan, who was now at the edge of the stage, his eyes red and wet. He'd tried to defend me, and they'd turned it against him, against us. Brian's voice floated from the bar, a low chuckle joining the chorus, and I realized he was enjoying this, reveling in my humiliation. The barn, once warm and festive, was now a battlefield, and I was losing. I reached the stage, my hands shaking as I helped Ethan down. His small body pressed against mine, and I felt his sobs against my chest. "I didn't mean to make it worse," he whispered, his voice muffled. "You didn't," I said, but my voice was hollow. I wanted to believe it, but the crowd's laughter, Samantha's cold dismissal, and Caleb's inaction were too much. I held Ethan tightly, my tears falling into his hair, and felt the weight of every eye in the room. I was breaking my strength, crumbling under their cruelty, and there was no way out. Not yet. Not here. I held Ethan against me, his sobs soaking into my dress, the barn's laughter still ringing in my ears. The crowd's eyes burned into us, and Samantha's voice, cool and dismissive, echoed from the stage. My heart was a shattered thing, but as I felt Ethan's small hands clutch my waist, something shifted. I wasn't just a victim of their words. I was his mother, and he'd stood up for me. I couldn't let his courage be for nothing. I wouldn't. I wiped my tears, my jaw tightening as I guided Ethan away from the stage. The crowd parted slightly, their whispers softer now, some faces showing flickers of respect, others uncertainty. Rachel was at my side in an instant, her hand on my shoulder. "Lauren, let's get out of here," she whispered, her voice thick with worry. "No," I said, my voice low but firm. "Not yet." I looked down at Ethan, his face streaked with tears, and knelt to meet his eyes. "You were so brave, buddy. I'm proud of you." He sniffled, his voice small. "But they laughed, Mom. I made it worse." I shook my head, my hand cupping his cheek. "You told the truth. That's never wrong." His eyes searched mine, and I saw a flicker of strength return. I stood, my resolve hardening. I wasn't going to let Samantha and Diane define us. Not anymore. I scanned the room, my gaze landing on the microphone Samantha had set down on the stage. My heart pounded, but I moved toward it, my steps steady despite the trembling in my hands. Rachel grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "Lauren, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done sooner," I said, pulling free. I climbed the steps, the wood creaking under my heels, and picked up the microphone. The room quieted, the band pausing mid-note. Samantha's face tightened, and Diane's sneer faltered. Caleb finally looked at me, his brow creasing, but he didn't move. I tapped the microphone, the soft thud echoing through the speakers. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to speak, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I began, my eyes sweeping the crowd. This is my brother's wedding, and I came here to celebrate him. But I can't stay silent anymore. The guests shifted, some leaning forward, others exchanging glances. I could feel Brian's stare from the bar, his amusement gone. I took a deep breath, my grip tightening on the microphone. "My son Ethan just told you what he heard." The bride called me a pathetic single mom, a discount model with the scratched label. Her mother said, "I'm a failure who's dragging this family down." A few gasps broke the silence, and Aunt Margaret nodded from her seat, her eyes fierce. I pressed on, my voice growing stronger. "I've spent years doubting myself, thinking I wasn't enough. But I'm a mother who's fought for her kid every single day. I'm a sister who's always loved her brother, even when it hurt. And I'm done letting anyone make me feel small." Samantha stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Lauren, this isn't the place." "No," I cut her off, my voice rising. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to humiliate me and my son, and then tell me to sit down." The words poured out raw and unfiltered, and I felt a fire I hadn't known I had. The crowd was silent now, their earlier laughter gone. Even Diane looked unsteady, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. I turned to Caleb, my eyes locking onto his. "You're my brother," I said, my voice breaking but strong. "I've always had your back, but tonight you let this happen. You let them tear me apart, and you did nothing." His face paled, his mouth opening, but no words came. I didn't wait for them. I looked out at the crowd, my chest heaving. "I deserve better. Ethan deserves better. And I'm not leaving until you all hear that." I set the microphone down, the sound reverberating through the barn. Ethan ran to me, his arms wrapping around my waist, and I held him close, my heart racing but alive. I'd taken the first step, and there was no going back now. Ethan's arms were tight around me, his warmth grounding me as the barn's silence pressed in. My words still hung in the air, raw and unyielding, and the crowd's eyes were locked on us. Samantha's face was a mask of barely contained fury, her hands clenched at her sides. Diane's sneer had vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. Caleb's gaze was on the floor, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his composure. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I took Ethan's hand, guiding him down the stage steps, my chin high despite the tremor in my legs. The crowd parted their whispers, softer now. Some faces showing flickers of respect, others uncertainty. Aunt Margaret caught my eye, her nod firm and proud, and it fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for me and Ethan anymore. I was fighting for every moment I'd doubted myself. Every night I'd felt less than enough. At the bottom of the steps, Marcus the DJ met my gaze. He gave a small, approving nod, then slipped Ethan's folded note back into his pocket, a quiet gesture of solidarity. I squeezed Ethan's hand, feeling his strength mirror mine. "Stay close, buddy," I whispered, and he nodded, his eyes brighter now, the tears drying. I turned to face Samantha, who was descending the stage, her movements stiff. "Lauren, you've made your point," she said, her voice low but edged with venom. "Can we move on now?" I stepped closer, my voice calm but unyielding. "No, Samantha. You don't get to brush this off. You humiliated my son and me in front of everyone. You owe us an apology." Her eyes widened, and a few guests gasped. Diane started forward, her voice sharp. "How dare you demand anything? You're the one causing a scene." I ignored her, keeping my eyes on Samantha. "You said those things about me. Own it. Or are you too afraid to face the truth?" The room was deathly quiet, the band's instruments silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Samantha's lips parted, but no words came. Her confidence, so polished all night, was crumbling. I could see it in the way her hands twitched, the way her eyes darted to Caleb, who still hadn't spoken. The crowd was watching, waiting, and I felt a surge of power. For once, I wasn't invisible. Rachel appeared beside me, her voice a fierce whisper. "You've got this, Lauren. Don't back down." I nodded, drawing strength from her. I looked at Ethan, his small hand still in mine, and saw his notebook tucked under his arm. It reminded me of the drawing inside the one labeled Mom's Superpowers. He believed in me, even when I hadn't believed in myself. That was enough to keep going. I turned back to the crowd, my voice steady. "I'm not here to ruin this day," I said, addressing them all. "But I won't let my son be shamed for telling the truth. I won't let anyone make us feel like we don't belong. We're enough just as we are." A few guests clapped softly, Aunt Margaret's hands leading the sound. Others nodded, their expressions softening. I saw Uncle Harold near the back, his eyes misty, and even Chloe, Samantha's friend, looked uneasy, her earlier smirk gone. Brian was still at the bar, but his glass was untouched, his face tight. For the first time, I didn't care what he thought. I looked at Caleb, my heart aching but resolute. "You have a choice," I said, my voice quieter now, meant just for him. "Stand with your family, or let this divide us. I hope you choose right." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I turned away, leading Ethan toward the barn's exit. The crowd's murmurs followed us, but I didn't look back. My dress was still stained with wine. My hands still shook, but I felt taller, stronger. Ethan's paper wristband, a school project he'd made with bright blue yarn, brushed against my skin, a reminder of his love. I stopped at the door, my hand on the handle, and took one last look at the room. Samantha stood, frozen Diane beside her, and Caleb's eyes met mine, full of conflict. I didn't wait for his answer. I pushed the door open, the cool night air washing over us, and stepped out, Ethan at my side, my heart steady in its quiet defiance. The night air was sharp against my skin. As I stepped out of the barn, Ethan's hand warm in mine. The gravel crunched under our feet, the distant hum of the reception fading behind us. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something heavier, like the weight of a door I'd just slammed shut. I'd spoken my truth, and there was no undoing it. Ethan looked up at me, his eyes wide but calm, his notebook tucked tightly under his arm. I squeezed his hand, forcing a small smile, but inside, I was bracing for what came next. We reached my car, parked under a sagging oak tree, its branches casting jagged shadows in the moonlight. I unlocked the door, but before we could climb in, I heard footsteps behind us. It was Rachel, her shawl slipping off her shoulder, her face a mix of relief and urgency. "Lauren, wait!" She called, her breath visible in the cool air. She stopped a few feet away, glancing at Ethan, then back at me. That was incredible. "I've never seen you like that!" I leaned against the car, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "I didn't plan it," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "It just happened." Rachel nodded, her eyes softening. "You shook them up in there." Samantha's face, she looked like she'd been slapped. "And Diane, she's been cornered by Aunt Margaret trying to explain herself." I let out a breath, picturing Diane's flushed cheeks, her usual poise unraveling. It should have felt good, but it didn't. Not yet. "What about Caleb?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "He's still in there, talking to some guests. I think he's rattled, but he's not saying much. Samantha's sticking close to him, trying to play it off." I nodded, the ache in my chest flaring. I'd hoped he'd follow me out, say something, anything. But his silence in the barn, his refusal to stand up for me, was still fresh like a bruise I couldn't ignore. Ethan shifted beside me, his sneakers scuffing the gravel. "Is Uncle Caleb mad at us?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "No, buddy. He's just figuring things out. This isn't your fault." My words felt hollow, but I needed him to believe them. I stood, glancing at Rachel. "I need to get Ethan home. It's been a long night." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Some people left after you spoke. Not many, but enough. They were whispering about Samantha, saying she went too far. You changed the room, Lauren." Her words landed softly like a pebble in still water, but they didn't ease the tightness in my throat. Change the room. Maybe, but at what cost? I opened the car door for Ethan, helping him buckle in his notebook now resting on his lap. As I closed the door, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, my stomach twisting when I saw Caleb's name on the screen. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. "Lauren, we need to talk. I'm sorry about tonight, but you didn't have to make a scene. Call me." His words were a mix of regret and blame, and they stung more than I expected. He was sorry, but he still thought I was the problem. I shoved the phone back into my purse, my jaw tight. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. Rachel watched me, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head, leaning against the car again. "I don't know. I thought standing up would feel different. Lighter. But it's just heavy." She reached out, squeezing my arm. "You did the right thing. Ethan needed to see that, and so did you." I looked at Ethan through the car window, his head resting against the seat, his eyes half closed. He'd been my anchor tonight, his courage sparking mine. But now, in the quiet of the parking lot, I felt the weight of what I'd done. I'd called out. Samantha challenged Caleb and faced a room full of strangers. But the rift with my brother, the judgment from Diane, The memory of Brian's smirk, they were all still there, pressing down on me. As Rachel hugged me goodbye, promising to call tomorrow, I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life, and I glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. His notebook was open again, his pencil moving slowly across the page. "What are you drawing?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "A shield," he said. "For us." My throat tightened, and I nodded, unable to speak. I pulled out of the lot, the barn's glow fading behind us, and drove into the dark, the road stretching out like a question I couldn't yet answer. Caleb's text. Rachel's words, the guests who'd left, they were all pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. For now, it was just me and Ethan and the quiet strength of his shield. In the back seat, his pencil scratching faintly against his notebook. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was back in the barn, replaying the stunned faces, the weight of my own voice. I'd stood up, but the victory felt hollow, like a fire that had burned out too soon. Caleb's text was a stone in my pocket, unanswered, and I wasn't sure I wanted to respond. When we pulled into our apartment complex, the parking lot was silent, the street lights casting a pale glow over the cracked asphalt. I helped Ethan out his notebook, clutched to his chest like a talisman. Inside our small living room felt both safe and stifling, the familiar clutter of art supplies and books, a stark contrast to the barn's polished chaos. I tucked Ethan into bed, his eyelids heavy but his voice clear. "Mom, did I do okay?" he asked, his hand reaching for mine. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. "You were incredible," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You made me so proud." He smiled faintly, then drifted off his notebook on the nightstand, its pages curling slightly at the edges. Alone in the kitchen, I poured a glass of water, the faucets drip loud in the quiet. My phone buzzed again, and I hesitated before checking it. Not Caleb this time, but a message from Aunt Margaret. "Lauren, what you did took guts. Ethan's a hero. I sent you something in the mail. Call me if you need me." Her words were a small warmth, but they couldn't fill the ache left by Caleb's absence. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock at the door. It was a delivery, a small padded envelope with Aunt Margaret's handwriting. Inside was a silver keychain shaped like a tiny sunflower, along with a note for strength from one fighter to another. I held it, the metal cool against my palm, and felt a lump in my throat. Someone saw me, really saw me, and it was both a comfort and a reminder of who hadn't. By afternoon, my phone lit up with a call from Caleb. I let it ring, my fingers hovering over the screen. When it went to voicemail, his voice came through, strained and halting. "Lauren, I'm sorry about last night. I didn't know how to handle it. Samantha's upset, but I know she was wrong. Can we talk? Please. I deleted the message, my chest tight. His apology was too late, too tangled with excuses. I didn't want to hear about Samantha's feelings. I wanted my brother back, the one who'd carried me on his shoulders at county fairs, who'd promised we'd always be a team. That Caleb felt gone, and the loss was sharper than any insult. Rachel texted later, filling in the gaps. Some guests walked out after you left? She wrote. Said Samantha crossed a line. Chloe's been quiet, and Diane's avoiding people. You shook things up, Lauren. I read it twice, trying to feel the triumph, but all I felt was fatigue. I'd exposed the truth, but it hadn't fixed anything. Not really. At Ethan's school pickup, his counselor Lisa pulled me aside. He's been different today, she said, her voice kind but curious. More confident, like he's carrying himself taller. Whatever happened, it's sticking with him. I nodded, managing a smile, but her words were a double-edged sword. Ethan was growing from this, but at what cost? He shouldn't have had to fight for me. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, the sunflower keychain in front of me. I traced its petals, thinking of Ethan's shield, of Aunt Margaret's note, of Caleb's unanswered call. I'd taken a stand, and the ripples were real guests, leaving Samantha's mask, slipping Ethan's newfound strength. But the price was heavy. My brother's silence, the fracture in our family, the exhaustion in my bones, it all settled over me like dust. I closed my eyes, the keychain still in my hand, and let the quiet swallow me, unsure if I'd ever feel whole again. A month had passed since the wedding, and the sharp edges of that night had softened like stones worn smooth by a river. I sat on the couch in our apartment, a mug of chamomile tea cooling in my hands, the morning light filtering through the blinds. Ethan was at school, his backpack heavier with new art projects. The quiet of the room was a gift, a rare moment to breathe. I'd started a journal, a spiral notebook with a green cover, and its pages were filling with thoughts I hadn't dared voice before. I flipped it open, my pen hovering over a blank page. Writing had become my way of untangling the mess of that night, of understanding who I was after standing up to Samantha and Caleb. I'd written about Ethan's courage, about the sunflower keychain from Aunt Margaret, about the silence that followed Caleb's call. But today, I wanted to write about something else, about me, about the woman I was becoming. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Rachel, her voice bright but careful. Hey, you free this afternoon? I'm in town. Thought we could grab coffee. I smiled, the sound of her voice a tether to the world outside my head. Yeah, I'd like that. Meet me at the park. Ethan loves the swings there. By noon, I was pushing Ethan on a swing at the local park, the air crisp with the first hints of fall. Rachel sat on a bench nearby, her scarf loose around her neck, a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Ethan's laughter rang out as he soared higher, his sneakers kicking at the sky. I watched him, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He'd been different since the wedding, bolder, quicker to smile, like he'd found a piece of himself up on that stage. Rachel patted the bench beside her, and I sat the wood cool against my jeans. You look good, she said, her eyes searching mine. Different. Like you're carrying less. I nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm trying. It's not easy, but I'm figuring it out. She sipped her coffee, her gaze on Ethan. He's a tough kid. Takes after you. I laughed softly, the sound surprising me. I hope he's tougher than me. I was a mess for a while. Rachel turned to me, her expression serious. You weren't a mess, Lauren. You were hurt. There's a difference. And what you did at the wedding, that was strength, not weakness. Her words settled over me, warm and solid. I thought of the journal, of the pages I'd filled with questions about my worth, my mistakes, my future. Writing had helped me see the truth. I wasn't defined by Samantha's cruelty or Caleb's silence. I was defined by the choices I made now, by the love I gave Ethan, by the life I was building. Ethan jumped off the swing landing with a thud in the mulch. "Mom, can we fly the kite?" He called, his cheeks flushed. I glanced at Rachel, who grinned. "Go on," she said. "I'll hold your tea." I grabbed the kite from my bag, a bright red diamond Ethan had made at school, its tail a tangle of ribbons. We ran across the grass, the kite tugging against the string, climbing higher with each gust. Ethan's laughter was infectious, and for a moment I was just a mom, not a woman carrying the weight of a fractured family. The kite dipped and soared, a splash of color against the gray sky, and I felt a quiet joy, fragile but real. As we reeled it in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my stomach tightening when I saw Caleb's name. Not a call this time, but a text. "I'm coming by tomorrow. I need to make this right. Please let me." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it to keep the distance I'd built, but another part, the part that remembered our childhood summers by the lake, wanted to believe he meant it. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my eyes on Ethan as he tied the kite string into a neat loop. The park was quiet now, the swing still the air, carrying the faint scent of leaves. I wasn't ready to answer Caleb, not yet, but for the first time, I felt like I could face him without breaking. The journal, the kite, Ethan's laughter. They were small anchors holding me steady as I learned to trust my own strength. The park's grass was damp under my sneakers as I walked back to the bench, Ethan skipping ahead, the kite tucked under his arm. Rachel handed me my tea, now lukewarm, and I sipped it, the chamomile faint but soothing. The sky was heavier now, clouds rolling in, but the weight in my chest had eased like a knot slowly unraveling. I glanced at my phone, Caleb's text still unanswered, and felt a quiet resolve. I'd reply, but on my terms, when I was ready. Ethan ran to a patch of dirt near the playground, kneeling to inspect something in the soil. I followed, curious, and saw him gently brushing away pebbles to reveal a tiny green sprout. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice bright. "It's my sunflower. It's growing." I knelt beside him, the earth cool against my knees. "You planted this?" I asked, my fingers hovering over the fragile stem. He nodded, his eyes shining. "After the wedding, I wanted something strong like you." My throat tightened, but I smiled, resting my hand on his shoulder. The sprout was small, barely an inch tall, but it was there, pushing through the hard ground. Like us. I thought of my journal, the pages I'd filled with raw, unfiltered thoughts, and realized I'd been planting something too, a new way of seeing myself, one that didn't bend under others' words. Rachel joined us, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. "You two are something else," she said, her voice warm. "Got any more seeds?" Ethan grinned, digging in his pocket and pulling out a small packet. "Got plenty," he said, handing her one. She laughed, and the sound was a balm, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I stood, brushing dirt from my jeans, and caught sight of a familiar car pulling into the park's lot. It was Uncle Harold, his gray hair catching the light as he climbed out, a paper bag in his hand. "Thought I'd find you here," he called, walking over with a slow, steady gait. He handed me the bag, his eyes crinkling. "Fresh rolls from the bakery. Figured you and Ethan could use a treat." I took it, the warmth of the rolls seeping through the paper. "Thanks," I said, my voice soft. Harold had always been a quiet presence in our family, the one who showed up with small gestures when words failed. I wondered if he knew about the wedding, if he'd heard the whispers that followed. He glanced at Ethan, who was now showing Rachel the sprout, and lowered his voice. "Caleb's been talking to me. He's torn up Lauren. Wants to fix things." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the bag. I got his text. "I just need time. Harold's hand rested briefly on my arm, a steady weight. Take all you need. He'll wait. His words were simple, but they carried a promise, a bridge to a future I couldn't yet see. I looked at Ethan, his hands cupped around the sprout like it was a treasure, and felt a stillness settle over me. Caleb's apology, Samantha's silence, the wedding's chaos, they were part of my story, but they weren't the whole of it. We walked back to the bench, Harold telling Ethan about the kites he'd flown as a kid. I listened, the rolls still warm in my hands, and felt the day's quiet beauty wrap around me. The journal waited at home, its pages ready for more. Ethan's sunflower was growing, and so was I. I sat the bench creaking softly and watched the clouds drift, my heart calm, my breath steady, carrying me toward whatever came next. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and the air in our apartment carried a new kind of quiet, like the hush after a long storm. I sat at the kitchen table, a stack of colored pencils spread out, sketching a simple landscape in my journal, a rolling hill, a single tree, a sky streaked with dawn. Ethan was in his room practicing lines for a school play, his voice, a soft hum through the thin walls. The routine we'd built felt like a small miracle, steady and ours. I'd taken a new job at the community center, not just teaching art, but coordinating programs for kids like Ethan, kids who needed a place to feel safe. The work was hard, the pay modest, but every time a shy third grader smiled at their finished painting, I felt a piece of myself settle. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something real, something that mattered. The phone buzzed, and I glanced at it expecting Rachel or maybe a work email. It was an invitation from Uncle Harold for a family barbecue next weekend, the first since the wedding. My thumb paused over the screen, a flicker of unease stirring. Caleb would be there, and likely Samantha. We'd talked once, a brief, careful call where he'd apologized again, promising to do better. I'd listened, nodded through the phone, but kept my distance, guarding the fragile piece I'd found. I set the phone down and picked up a green pencil, shading the hill in my sketch. The journal had become my haven, a place to map out who I was, without the weight of others' words. I wrote about the kids at work, about Ethan's growing confidence, about the mornings I woke without that old knot in my chest. I wrote about forgiveness, too, not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that lets you carry it differently. Ethan poked his head into the kitchen, his script crumpled in his hand. "Mom, can you help me with my lines?" he asked, his grin lopsided. I closed the journal, smiling. "Sure, buddy, let's do it." We sat on the couch, him stumbling through his role as a young explorer, me feeding him cues. His laughter filled the room, bright and unburdened, and I marveled at how far we'd come. He wasn't the scared boy from the wedding anymore, and I wasn't the woman who doubted her worth. Later, I stepped onto our tiny balcony, the evening air cool against my skin. The city hummed below, a steady pulse of lights and sounds. I leaned against the railing, my journal tucked under my arm, and thought about the barbecue. Part of me wanted to skip it to stay in this safe bubble with Ethan. But another part, the part that had faced a room full of strangers and survived, knew I could handle it. Not for Caleb or Samantha, but for me. I opened the journal to a new page, my pencil scratching out a single sentence. "I am enough." The words looked small, but they felt vast, like a promise I'd finally learned to keep. Ethan's voice drifted from inside, practicing his lines again, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment wrap around me. The past was still there, its scars faint, but real, but it no longer held me captive. I was free to choose what came next. The barbecue was on a Sunday, the air thick with the scent of grilled corn and charcoal. I stood in Uncle Harold's backyard, a plastic cup of lemonade in my hand, watching Ethan chase his cousins through the grass. His laughter was a melody, free and unweighted, and it anchored me. I'd been nervous coming here, unsure of how it would feel to face Caleb again. But now, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden haze over the yard, I felt a quiet steadiness, like I'd finally found my footing. Caleb approached his steps, hesitant, a bottle of soda in his hand. Samantha was across the yard, talking to Aunt Margaret, her smile polite but distant. Lauren, Caleb said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting my cup on a nearby table. We walked to the edge of the yard where a wooden fence separated us from the neighbor's garden. The chatter of the barbecue faded, leaving just the hum of cicadas. "I've been a lousy brother," he said, his eyes on the ground. I let Samantha's words slide, let Diane's too. "I should have stood up for you." His apology was raw, unpolished, and I felt the old ache stir. But it didn't overwhelm me. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the boy who'd once shared his Halloween candy when mine ran out. "I needed you that night," I said, my voice even. "But I learned I can stand on my own. Ethan and I were okay." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm trying to make it right. Samantha's working on herself too. She wants to apologize if you'll hear her." I glanced at Samantha, her posture stiff as she spoke to Margaret. "Maybe one day," I said. "But not today. I'm setting boundaries now, Caleb. For me and Ethan." He looked at me, his eyes softening with something like respect. "You've changed," he said. "Stronger." I smiled faintly, the word settling like a stone smoothed by time. Stronger. Not because I'd won or proven them wrong, but because I'd chosen myself. I'd chosen Ethan. I'd chosen the life we were building, one small, deliberate step at a time. Later, I found Ethan by a picnic table showing Uncle Harold a new drawing, a field of sunflowers, vibrant and sprawling. "This is our garden," he said, his voice proud. "We're planting more next week." I touched his shoulder, my heart full. That garden, those sunflowers were more than plants. They were proof we could grow through hard soil, through doubt, through pain. I thought of my journal now, thick with entries, each one a marker of who I was becoming. I wasn't the woman who'd stood trembling in that barn. I was someone new, someone who knew her worth, didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The lesson I'd learned wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, woven into the everyday strength, isn't about never breaking. It's about picking up the pieces and choosing who you let hold them. It's about forgiving not for them, but for you. It's about looking at your scars and seeing not shame, but survival. I'd carried Samantha's words, Diane's disdain, Caleb's silence, and I'd set them down, not because they didn't hurt, but because I was more than their weight. As the barbecue wound down, I sat on the grass, Ethan beside me, his head resting against my arm. The sky was a deep indigo stars just beginning to peek through. I felt whole, not because everything was perfect, but because I'd learned to live with the imperfections. I was enough, and so was Ethan. That was the truth I'd carry forward, the one that would guide us through whatever came next. What moment made you realize your own strength? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying your own light. Here's to healing, to growing, to finding peace in the quiet moments. Good night, and take care.